The opinions and statements made by the guests of the Success in Practice podcast are their own, and I do not endorse or accept responsibility for their positions. Any information given by myself or the guests is educational in intention and not to be taken as medical advice. If you choose to act on the content involved in the podcast, you do so at your own risk.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Success in Practice podcast. Today, I'm rejoined for a second episode by Gary Fryer. Gary completed his osteopathic training in 1990 and practiced osteopathy in Melbourne, Brisbane, and rural Victoria. Gary has been extensively involved in osteopathic education and research, teaching osteopathic principles, technique, and research methods at Victoria University since 1997. He currently heads up the osteopathy program at that university. He has authored over 60 articles in peer-reviewed journals and many book chapters, and has been an invited speaker at osteopathic conferences in Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, Korea, and Brazil. Gary, mate, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm grateful that you've joined again, and the first episode was very well received by the audience, and I'm grateful you've decided to do a second one, and I'm looking forward to it.
Look, you're welcome. Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
I hope you enjoyed the last one. I know that a lot's happened since then, and we'll get into that, and we'll get your thoughts on some things that have happened and some things that you're doing at the moment as well. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about your clinical experience, because I don't think we talked about that enough, or at least in the detail that I'd like in the first episode. But tell us about your particular clinical experience, your time as a clinician. How long did you actually spend in clinic? Like how many years, how many hours, how many patients? What really interested you? What types of conditions were you seeing? What particular techniques did you find, suited your practice and the patients that you were seeing? And I'll be quite transparent. The reason why I'm really interested in asking about or learning about your clinical experience, because I think the best educators and the best, I guess, academics are ones that have had their heels dug into clinical practice for a very long time before they decide to, I guess, teach other people and go on and head up university programs. So I think you're one of those people, Gary. So I'd like to know about your clinical experience and share that with the audience.
Yeah, sure. Look, you've mentioned a few locations where I practice, so it's sort of it's been a bit of an evolution. When I finished my course, in Melbourne at the end of 1990, I had in mind that I wanted to go interstate and broaden my experience. But at the time, I was sort of had a partner who had another year to finish university, so I practiced for that first year. I had a go at setting up a new practice in a of all things, a naturopathic clinic, and I also had I think 2 days a week I was with a doctor in Box Hill. So it was a bit of a slow start, really. It was not, anyone who's, started to build up a practice from scratch knows that it's a bit of a slog, and walking around trying to drum up business and then, only to leave it a year later when I then moved to Brisbane. So that was probably a little bit of a frustrating start, and I wouldn't recommend that course to any new graduate. I was then fortunate enough to then go into a clinic or two clinics in Brisbane, and this was 1992, and osteopathy had only just become registered in Queensland, due to the efforts of some osteopaths like Thomas Whitten and
Peter Lamb
and others, and so it was, and I was really fortunate to then go in and work with Thomas in West End and look, it was great to have mentors, and Thomas. There were others. Mark Keyworth at the time would come down from Noosa, and yeah, in my early career, yeah, that was really useful. And so I look, I was always been more, I guess, attracted to what most people would call structural approaches. Rather than indirect or energetic approaches, I guess because it sort of seemed to make sense to me more. So, I've learned from them sort of different, different ways of applying muscle energy, high velocity, other forms of direct work like direct myofascial work. In those first number of years, I was really keen to learn. I think I mentioned I was a little bit bitter when I left university, thinking I had a bit of a rough deal with being the first cohort of a brand, the first government-funded course. Yeah, that first year or two was in some ways a little bit of a shambles. Yeah, there was a lack of continuity, and so I really had a desire to learn, and so I'd in those first few years tried to get to as many osteopathic conferences, and I was able to see both Mike and Bill Katura, when they came out, Wayne English, Philip Greenman, a number of years later down in Melbourne. Laurie Hartman. I was very influenced also by Vladimir Janda, the Czech Republic physician with the concepts of upper and lower cross syndromes and myofascial balance and things like that. So, and really tried to apply that in my clinic, and felt that I really did get a lot of results with for me, it was a big emphasis on sort of looking at myofascial balance, soft tissue. I've really used muscle energy a lot. I really have an affinity for muscle energy. I think it works, on a lot of different levels. Being, at least partly an active technique, as far as motor learning, and I sort of really see it now as a transition between the passive techniques and active rehabilitation. So, that was very largely my approach. Myofascial approach, still using a fair bit of high velocity, and then a little bit of indirect counter strain at times where I thought it made sense in terms of trying to quieten down the tissues or quieten down the sensitivity of the tissues.
Let me contrast that that first year where you went out on your own in Melbourne versus, I guess, the following years where you had you were working in a clinic with some mentors, seeing some patients. Obviously, the volume had increased for you once you went to Brisbane.
Hugely,
Yeah. And so contrast that for me from I guess a passion perspective, I mean, can you talk to us about your enthusiasm in that first year versus when you were actually seeing a lot of patients? And was there a difference in terms of your energy levels, your particular kind of mood, your mindset? Can you contrast that for us and just give us an idea of the differences? Because I think a lot of new graduates would that are listening to this would love to hear that your experience might maybe mirror some of their own experiences.
Yeah, look, it makes all the difference, of course, when you're in a busy practice. When you're building a practice from scratch, it's hard work. There'll be weeks where you think things are starting to really pick up and you're seeing a number of patients, and then suddenly there's a week or two where it really drops away, and that's often the pattern. I mean, depending on where you set up, I think probably for a year or two, there's a fluctuation as it stabilizes, and if you're not busy, it's disheartening. You doubt your skills, you doubt your worth, you lose interest. So things changed a lot for me, of course, when I was able to go into a busy practice, with practitioners who are already sort of feeling overloaded. It was. Made a big difference in a whole lot of areas, and fortunately for new grads these days, these circumstances still exist. If as you know, we have two of our current three courses in Melbourne. There are so many osteopaths, rural, interstate, capital city Sydney, that are really in that situation where they're overloaded and they can't, for whatever reason, attract a grad or a grad who is willing to pack up and travel. So I would, every opportunity I can, I try to impress our senior years. Be flexible, be open to the idea of travel. You won't regret it.
Mm. I want to also ask you. So the volume of patients clearly improved when you went into a busier clinic. What kind of numbers were you seeing? Like, give us, so we just understand your experience. Like, you were busy working 5 days a week, seeing 60, 70 patients plus,
Yeah, yeah,
that kind of thing. That was consistently for at least
yeah.
3 or 4 years, 5 years. How long were you kind of doing that
I,
for?
I was in Brisbane for 4 years, and I had worked between two practices. There's another one in Camp Hill that was run by a therapeutic or remedial therapist, and again, that was sort of really busy. So I was working between 4 and 5 days a week. Sometimes in the latter years, I also did some teaching because I was really interested in teaching and worked at a natural therapy college, doing I think what they called at the time postural integration or structural integration, sort of sort of a simplistic sort of view of a biomechanical approach to the body. But yeah, I'd be typically seeing somewhere, usually 10 patients, maybe 12 patients a day at that time. I have always been a little cautious not to overwhelm myself with too crazy a day. Because for me at least, and everyone's different, sometimes when if I'm seeing really more than 12 patients a day, I'm getting tired and I'm starting to lose the love a bit. Now,
Yeah.
not everyone's like that, but I've tried to keep some sort of balance there.
Yeah, no, definitely do what works for you. How long okay, so you were in Brisbane or Queensland for 4 years, and then you went back to Melbourne, or what happened after that?
Yeah. I've a long history of setting up clinics and then leaving them. So I came back to Melbourne. At that time, my wife then sort of missed a family, and so
Yeah.
although things were going really well, for me, we moved back to Melbourne for a year and a half. Again, set up a sort of a practice for that year and a half in Clifton Hill, and oh gosh, there was another one, but Fairfield, and
How was that second experience for you in terms of setting up? Now you've got a bit of experience under your belt. You know that you can get success. Was
yeah.
that a different experience for you than the first time around?
Look, yeah, it was. Look, much more positive experience than that first year out. I had more confidence. I was able to get things, started a lot more quickly, and so it certainly in that year and a half, wasn't extremely busy, but it was
Mm.
busy enough and building.
Yeah.
And at that time, that's also when I just trying to get the time frame. I think I must have been the end of that time I started to inquire about teaching at VU, because I started there at about 97, I guess. So it must have been But yeah, oh no, and then only to in another life decision move to country Victoria.
Okay.
Um, hmm.
All
And
right. So country Victoria, and then you worked out there?
yeah, look, I worked there. Look for in part-time practice, so that was typically 3 days a week, and the other 2 days for much of that time was teaching. So I then, in 1998, got a ongoing teaching appointment after doing a bit of sessional work in 97 at VU. I
So
then
sorry
would travel
to cut
down
you
by
off.
train. Yeah,
So you would travel by train from regional Victoria to teach at VU. So
yeah,
that would have been a fair distance.
yeah. Look, it was an hour and a half by train.
All right. Okay.
I'd go down, come back. So 3 hours
Right.
travel a day.
Okay.
It was a fair commitment, but for me, travelling on these country V-line trains, it was actually uninterrupted work time.
Mm.
So it really worked for me because I'd, you know, for the next almost 20 years, I'd get on to. Oh, sorry, just hearing a bit of background noise.
No, mate. My home where I'm recording this is next to an airport. So
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So you just heard a helicopter go. That was a
Righto.
helicopter flying over flying over my home. So
Good.
nothing going on here. That's it's just the podcast we're recording. Yes.
Yeah.
So
So I would.
okay.
Yeah. So it was uninterrupted work time. So it worked.
The question I have for you is that how long did that your clinical years, in terms of at least 3 days a week, 10 to 12 patients a day, how long did you kind of keep that up for? How many years? Was that over a span of a good 15, 20 years of clinical practice?
Yeah, that was the majority of. Well, there was a period. Let me see. So there would have been a period for 8 years of doing that. So I worked in a practice with two physiotherapists, an acupuncturist, a psychiatrist, and I think a remedial therapist. So yeah, that would have been from 98 to when I 2007, when I moved and took the family to live in Kirksville. So I got an invitation to continue my research and do some teaching in Kirksville. So I went there for a 2-year period from 2007 June to 2009. So in that period of time, I didn't practice. I wasn't able to practice other than, teaching and working with students.
We did discuss your time in Kirksville on the first episode, so I don't want to go deeply into that.
Yeah.
So for people there that want to listen more about that you can find that on the first episode with Gary. So you came back from Kirksville and then back into the same kind of hybrid role of teaching and clinical practice. When did you finally go? Well, before I ask you that question, in that time of your clinical practice, was there anything? Did you find a niche for you, or did you kind of just were you always a generalist? Was there anything that particularly interested you?
Look, I've always been a generalist. I mean, in a country practice, there's maybe less opportunity, to specialize, but I wasn't particularly interested in specializing. I was happy to see everyone who walked in, and for me, that made it more interesting.
Okay, and when did you finally kind of go, well, I'm all in on teaching? And was that when you kind of got the role in being the head of the program at VU? Was that?
Yeah, at that time, then, and that, and I'm not sure of the time frames. I think that's about 2015, where we reduced my fraction more, and so I went down to just 1 day of practice. A week at Castlemaine and expanded. That probably was about 2017. So just 1 day of practice and essentially having a full-time role. And then when COVID hit, that sort of made a bit of a mess of of things. 2020, I continued to do that one day of practice through most of 2020, but at the end of 2020, changed, and I moved from Melbourne. Actually, it was in 2021. Moved down to Melbourne, and I sort of then ceased practice at that point. So I
When
haven't been in practice since the 2021.
when did you officially take over at VU as the head of the osteopathy program?
Look, the title sort of the university structure has varied depending on the particular university structure. I sort of have nominally this title of head of discipline, osteopathy, and that I'll have to look at my CV. I think it was probably about 2014 that happened. My title, apart from that, has been course chair, and I've sort of been, course chair and head of discipline. But thankfully, in the last year, have been sharing the role of course chair with my colleague Nick Tripodi, and that's been really helpful, for me to share that position.
Okay, so what we're looking at is for the listeners is somebody who's been practicing since 1990. 20 before you took over that, course chair or the program for almost 24 years in private in clinical practice, many hours of experience, many hands-on patients. You've obviously in that time frame broadened your skill set. You've used multiple different approaches. You've seen countless different cases. And that's, I mean, you began teaching also earlier. You mentioned around 97 was when you started teaching, but even that's 7 years into practice, and your teaching time at that point wasn't as, I guess, intense as what it is now. And you gradually built up the intensity of your teaching as your clinical practice kind of started to reduce. And so I think that sets the stage really well to see why Gary is really well suited as somebody who would be, head of a course, because he although he understands the academic process, the technicality of teaching, because you've been doing it for a while, you also understand the clinical aspects of osteopathy and some of the, I guess, the uniqueness, what makes us osteopaths, because you've experienced it in the clinic, you've applied it yourself, and you've gotten results with it. And so, this will be important. And I'm setting the stage here because it's important that people understand when me and Gary have a conversation about some of the future topics that he understands osteopathy. I'm not talking to somebody who's just the head of a program who doesn't have a lot of clinical experience. And so I think that's important for the listeners to know. So
I'm always happy for people to pump up my tires. So thank you. But I wanted to say that in the course leadership role, it really is at VU. It's a team that works together. I have a leadership role and I have say on different things, but it's not just me. It's really a consensus pathway. We have lots of meetings and review meetings, and so it's not certainly not just down to me. It's our team.
Look, I understand there would be a team approach that would be obviously the best approach and something that would be part of the operation of the university. But I mean, it would be, I guess, not correct to say that you're somebody that just kind of leads without having an input into what goes on, especially when it comes to, I guess, filling positions, teaching positions, clinical supervision roles. You have an input on that. You get to obviously see the caliber of applicants, and you get to decide.
Not so much clinical supervision roles. They're recruited more by the clinical team, the clinic coordinators. Though sometimes I'm on those selection panels too.
But especially teaching, whoever's teaching certain subjects. I mean, you would have a direct input into the hiring of teaching staff. Would that be fair to say?
Certainly for our ongoing staff,
Yeah.
usually
Okay.
there, and but the yeah, which staff teach which particular units. Again, it's a bit of a consensus agreement, and it's usually dictated by our own particular interests and sometimes set of skills. So again, it is really, the way things work. It tends to be very much, a group consensus, team meeting. It's not me cracking the whip and
No, no.
directing everything.
I didn't think it would be, but I think your voice in those meetings would be informed by clinical experience. Not just, I guess, research and academia, and so that's important, I guess. And this is a good segue for us to go into the next question. You mentioned the team approach and the consensus approach at VU. Tell us about the last year at VU. Tell us about 2025. You went into 20, and we had our first episode, I think, as you were about to kick off 2025. And from memory, you mentioned to me that you were looking at taking up a teaching role again, and looking into teaching principles and I guess philosophy or the subject that may deal with that. Did that happen? There were some changes that you discussed in our last episode. How do those go? Those changes? And I guess when you sit and discuss some goals with your staff, what were you hoping to achieve in 2025, and were you able to do that?
Hello everyone, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone for watching and listening to the podcast. If you have received value from this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to like, share, follow and subscribe to the channel on whichever platform that you are listening on. If any of the conversations have resonated with you and you feel that I can help elevate your practice, you can find me at successinpractice.net. That is, the Success in Practice program can be found at successinpractice.net. The Success in Practice program is the signature program that takes a practitioner who may be struggling with retaining patients. They may not be certain about building effective treatment strategies, and they may feel somewhat anxious and doubtful about what they are going to do with a patient. And they are not really accelerating in the real world of private practice. It takes this practitioner and it turns their careers right around to the point where the patients have an effective diagnosis and a real treatment plan that they can take home. Patients are happy to book in multiple sessions with you, and they are confident about your abilities. And more importantly, you now have direction and are confident about your own abilities. The program streamlines how you operate as a practitioner. Guys, you should have been taught this at university, but you weren't. You may have been practicing for the last few years thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a more effective way of engaging with patients and getting them results. Well, there is. And this is what the program delivers. Go to successinpractice.net and check out the options available to you. See where I can help you easily grow your patient list and finally earn the rewarding income that you deserve. For all the information on how you can reach me personally, check out the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the chat transcripts from these podcasts. These are valuable and a wealth of information. I really hope that you're enjoying the podcast. Guys, leave a comment if there's any questions on this episode, and please, don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Now, back to the show.
Look, I think, firstly, major changes in university curriculums take time. It's a slow process, and if it's a major change, it can take years because it's got to go through different committees to get approval. So we're well on. We achieved a lot last year because last year we underwent our comprehensive course review. Now, this is a internal quality assurance process that every course needs to go through every 5 years, and it involves a number of meetings and with our course team. It also involves things like input from our external members on our program advisory committees, focus groups with students and graduates, so that it informs us about the changes that we've made. So the things I think I spoke to you about had come from our course team and what we wanted to achieve, but we needed to go through this process and then, have the outcomes of that be approved by the panel, this external panel, which in fact it has now done. So So many of these big changes I think I might have flagged to you have not yet been implemented and won't be implemented until next year. Because now, we're actually we've had approval to go ahead and make changes to the some of the units that we deliver, deleting some or discontinuing some and creating new units. Like I think I mentioned to you, we'd planned to have an introduction to the osteopathic profession unit as our very first unit when students come into the course. We haven't, since our last major course change, going to block model. The first unit that students come to is sort of this evidence and research unit, and so they don't. It's not students coming into osteopathy. It takes them half a year before they're actually sort of come in contact with an osteopathic unit, or almost half a year. We realised we've got a problem with instilling a strong sense of professional identity and
A framework.
A framework, and students knowing who is an osteopath, what do they do, what do we stand for, all this sort of thing, and so we want to this change we hope will instill that from the beginning. Now, this unit's been approved. We've got to write it. It won't be delivered until next year.
Yeah. And so who writes that, Gary? Like who sits there and says?
Look, the team. I hope I certainly will be, am being involved with it. Maybe leading it to a large degree, but it'll also be involved with most of our first year teachers because it'll be a first year unit. And Victoria University have got this unusual system where they've got a separate college for anyone who teaches into first year. So it's sort of, but we get on. I mean, we've got some great working relationship with our first year osteo colleagues, and we all work together, so that's not a problem for us. But it'll be mainly that group and me and maybe Nick. They'll be sitting down to develop that introductory unit.
Okay, and I guess we'll probably talk again before you release that. I guess the hope is that we get to pass on the things that we were taught to future generations. It's when I discuss this with osteopaths, usually one of the last questions I have in the podcast is, what are some of the things you'd like to see, in the next 10 years of osteopathy? And most people, osteopaths seem to be quite humble when they're asked that question, but the thing they all can agree on is that they just hope that osteopathy stays unique in its approach and it sticks to its principles and its philosophy. And so I guess that's the feedback from me and some of the people I've had on this show is that particular subject does really inspire and also reflect the history of osteopathy and what's made osteopaths successful in the last since the inception of the profession. So yeah, good luck with that, and I hope that gets all done for 2027. What were some of the things? I guess you said that big, large structural changes take time. Were there any smaller kind of things that you could kind of, hit the nail on the head pretty quick with and make some? Maybe it could be either, I don't know, maybe staffing changes or some things where you shuffle people around, or I don't know. I mean, you could best answer that. But was there anything that was changed last year or that you were able to do that kind of you saw the fruits that within that year?
Yeah, yes, certainly. I mean, we're always reviewing and tweaking and modifying, the units every time a unit gets delivered. For me personally, a small success was the restructure of some of our second year units, where VU have this block model, which I may have mentioned last time, and basically subjects are taught sequentially. You just do one subject at a time, and they're typically classes are in a 3-hour block, and in our osteopathic clinical skills subjects, we were having 6 hours in a day, 2 3-hour blocks. That was largely overwhelming, I think, because 6 hours is a long time, even if it's a mix of a workshop setting and a mix of theory and practical. So I was able to argue against that sort of normal block model and have two by two, so essentially 4 hours in a day, separated with an hour break, but have it over these classes over an extra day that way. So it spread the load a little bit better, and it was really well received by students and staff. Made better use of the time. So that's sort of a small example of tweaking one subject and seeing immediate benefits.
Yeah, great. No, good stuff. And I guess moving on, have you had any reviews and planning for 2026? And are there any smaller changes you I guess want to make coming into this year? Is that happening? Is there anything that you want to fill us in on for this year?
Look, I mean, for this year, the course is staying pretty much as it's been, albeit that, as I say, we're always tweaking and improving the subjects. Whenever it's delivered, we sort of have a review. We call it our final Friday, work out what hasn't worked well, what we're going to change. But this year we'll be particularly working on the major course change, like the introductory to osteopathy unit. We're streamlining and reducing the number of evidence-based practice units. We feel they're a bit superfluous, some of them, and we can do it in fewer units, given that we integrate that through a lot of the other units as well, which opens it up for some other units. We're also...
Tell us about that a little bit, Gary. What was the problem there? Identify that for us, and then what were your proposed changes to the evidence-based, I guess, parts of the units?
Yeah, and look, it's simply that when the course in that since the last course change, we've had a subject or a unit around evidence-based medicine in first year, in second year, and then 2 in third year. And the original idea was to really try to instill, a sense of critique and evidence seeking in students, which I think it did well. But I think we, have come to realize that some of these units, were not as content dense as they might have been. That we, when we reviewed them, we thought we could actually collapse those into fewer units, and we're actually going to go down to just the one in second year and third year, to enable something such as the introductory unit in first year, and another unit in third year. And so this will, and the extra unit in third year will be around more resistance training, sort of setting up skills in that area, which will support some of the exercise rehab in the master's part, and also streamline students, if they wish, into that graduate certificate in strength and conditioning that many of our grads like to do. So they're just, they're bigger changes, and they take a lot of thought, a lot of work, and unfortunately a lot of years to implement, simply because they've got to be approved by, probably 3 or 4 university committees along their path.
Yeah. When you look at, I guess, making some of those changes, whether they're large changes that take, a couple of years, or even smaller changes that you might see the fruits of pretty quickly, do you what kind of consultation do you have with the profession on those pathways? I'll let you answer that, and then I'll give you a follow-up question on that.
Yeah, look, our discussion with the profession usually comes about at our PAC meetings, and that's a Program Advisory Committee meeting. We have 2 of them a year, and We have on that we've got, representatives from the academics in the different colleges, or our senior college and our first year college. We've got and the clinic. And then we've got external people. So we invite external osteopaths to come in. We've got a representative from Osteopathy Australia. Usually it's the president. And we've also got some of our external clinic members, our community clinic representative there. So we've also got students, of course, there too. So at those meetings, we give them a review of the course in that half year, how it's gone, what our plans are, and in the case of these plans, in the last 2 meetings, we've presented them and got feedback from the external members and the students as to whether they think this is a good idea or not, or what else they'd do, and overwhelmingly, they've supported that.
Yeah, and in terms of external members, how do you go about choosing those, Gary? I mean, do you often have even like interstate members that you invite? I think that's important too, seeing as we're trying to get some graduates to head interstate. Is that something you'd consider, or is that something that's happened before?
Look, it's something we consider. We haven't had external members. Most of the external people are people that we've got connections with already, or representative from the Osteopathy Australia. If for instance the president's not available, they'll nominate somebody. We have asked representatives from the board and so on before, but usually they've not taken that up. But no, it's not something that we would widely canvass expressions of interest for. But we can be open to getting wider views.
I think that'd be a good idea, especially if
the only problem, and the reason we haven't done that is if you invite, a group of osteopaths, to voice their opinion on a subject, they'll probably all have very different but equally strong opinions, and it can become,
challenging.
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah, look, I wouldn't recommend you get maybe 10 of them in a room, but I think maybe 1 or 2. One of the fears is that with the ever so growing population of osteopaths in Melbourne and Victoria, that the representation becomes quite centric to that state. And so I guess it would be good for, to get a voice from New South Wales, to get a voice from South Australia. Western Australia is about to have their own university coming in soon. And so at least the states that don't have access to university programs, it's good that there's at least some kind of input from those people. It might just be 1 or 2 people. I don't think it would do you any good to have 10 in a room. They could never agree on probably most topics, and they would probably not agree very strongly, like you mentioned. I want to ask you, I guess, a second part to that question. I asked you if there was any consultation by the profession. How can the profession support you more, Gary, in your role as, I guess, in what you do at Victoria University? How can whether it's the association or whether it's the profession as a whole, how can we support your role there? What can we do?
Yeah, look.
And it's okay if you say there's not much you can do, but if there are things that you've thought about, like, can somebody give us a hand with this?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I certainly understand that, there are people that are frustrated because they feel they don't have input and they don't know what's happening. Probably, the best way is being informed is through the association. But I guess a couple of things they can do. I mean, there are, albeit limited opportunities, there are opportunities for teaching and being a clinician. I think at this stage we're very lucky. We've got more people interested in doing sessional or casual, clinician work and teaching, then we have places to offer. But sometimes, things change, and we do need people sometimes at short notice. So putting in expressions of interest there. If somebody has really a desire to have an academic input, probably the first port of call would be a clinician, and then being involved in some classes as assisting role and leading on from that. They can be involved, I guess, as I mentioned, with the program advisory committee, though, up till now, it tends to have been, we seek expressions of interest from osteopaths that we know, rather than the other way around. But look, I guess we're open to that. Being involved in any research project that you hear, most of the research projects, surveys and the like, are run by either academics and students, and often it's frustrating because we don't get buy-in or recruitment from the profession. So it's a really nice show of support. Whenever there's please join this study, it'll only take 5 minutes, for osteopaths to do that. We'd really appreciate that. And I guess, look, lastly, not to badmouth university or graduates. And I don't mind telling you that the "hey guys, you should have been taught this at university" does rub a number of people up the wrong way.
Yeah, I've come across that. I've come across that. Look, I guess one of the segue questions to that is, last time we had a discussion. I mentioned how, when I was going through university, and even probably, I'm sure so when you were beginning your course, or when you were going through your course, we'd often have these weekends where osteopaths would come down and run, you'd get a few different osteopaths together, and the students would come in. Your feedback on that was that, as much as you could lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. Has there been any kind of, has that been thought about? Has it been discussed amongst your staff in terms of trying to reinvigorate, because that's one way that we could get involved from interstate. We'd come down for the weekend and put something on.
Yes, it has been discussed, and yes, I think it's a great idea. We've got a couple of logistical problems, and that is within our course structure and hours, we just don't have space for guests anymore. But we do have SOMA, VU SOMA, the Student Osteopathic Medicine Association. However, last year it seemed like they could actually fold and disappear. But I'm confident now. They've reformed. They're keen to do those sort of things. So I see those sort of things are really valuable. But they're better organised by our student association, which can then run like evening classes at Victoria University, and so on. But the other issue is, unfortunately, students have appeared to become, I don't know whether it's less and less interested in doing those, or very time conscious, or it's been a real challenge for SOMA to attract students to these events over the last couple of years. But I think we're all in combination with the student members trying to really inspire the students to say, hey, you've got so much to gain from going to these. It'll enthuse you. You'll learn new things. If you want to be an osteopath, if you're, that's why you're here. You should be doing these things. So we hope it'll happen.
Last year, and they'll continue this year, I ran a few courses down in Melbourne, and that were well received. And part of that was to, like I'd run a course from, say, 1 till 5, but I invited the students to come down from 9 till 12 and do 3 hours of technique and so forth. And it was all free and all that kind of stuff. And it was, we had about a good 15, 20 students turn up, which is fantastic,
Great.
which is great, right? What I guess, and you're right. I think it's you're trying to fit it in terms of curriculum hours will be very difficult. This would be seen as extracurricular, but I think where the support would come in, is to get the university to actually help us out. Like, I'd love to be able to do it at the university. Like for me to actually, say, look, I'll be at VU on this. I'm running a course in Melbourne from 1 to 5 p.m. But from 9 till 12, I'll be at VU. This will be the room that we're in. Whoever's interested, come down and we can do 3 hours of X, Y, Z. That would be, that's been difficult because I don't think that, there's an avenue for that. And we'd like to do that through the university program. What I mean by that, not particularly through yourself or the staff, but through an association like VU SOMA. And so that would be something that they would then have to go to you to and say, can we get access to the rooms? What can be done there? And
Yeah.
so if that ever comes to your desk, Gary, or if you have some kind of input on that, or I don't know who allocates that, is that something that can be suggested to your staff, to the different levels of bureaucracy at the university to see if that could
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah, look, I'm really happy to support any VU SOMA, extracurricular, guest speaker or workshop. And so yes, that can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because it's as for
Um,
us, it's hard to find a venue where you've got a lot of treatment
mm,
tables. That's
mm.
the difficult part.
The
Uh,
Yeah, the only, I guess, only concerns, and I don't think that's any concern in your case, but we've got to be mindful of how the university would perceive reputational damage, and if we were running a course or they were running even a course on a topic that was considered really highly contentious and might bring the university in disrepute, and arguably some of the more fringe sort of areas could fall into that, then we might have to make a judgment call and say, oh look, you'll have to take that off campus, and if you want to run that.
yeah,
But
that's fine. I think
for
that's
yeah,
yeah. I think everybody needs to do what's in their best interests, and if the interests align, the university has its interests and making sure the reputation doesn't get damaged, and whoever's presenting a course has their own particular interests. And if two parties' interests align, then I think something can be worked out. And if they don't align, then yeah, you take it somewhere else. It's not a problem. I don't think that's an issue. But yeah, look, I'm glad that that's
mm,
something that you could support. And I guess if anyone needs help with that, if they're thinking about doing something like this, I know that someone like John Marshall runs courses all over Melbourne, and he brings out. I mean, he brought out Ed Goering.
yeah, yes, yeah, no, and I
Like
was there, and yeah, we,
yeah,
we we did that at VU. So,
yeah,
yeah, in some cases, we've done it with the Osteopathy Australia, but if
yeah,
we can support some venues that we think there's some benefit to staff and students, do that. In fact, John's bringing Lisa Di Stefano out here in a couple of weeks, and one of the courses that she's doing is will be at VU. The other isn't.
yeah. No, and that's good. I think more of
Mm,
that, because if
mm.
we can, I guess, do that and bring that back to osteopathy, that will make your job easier, especially when it comes to doing the whole introduction to osteopathic profession. It's good to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
input from other professionals and people who have been doing it for a long time as well. All right, I guess I want to move on to um, a discussion that you and I had. It was quite an informal discussion over a drink, and I was quite glad that I saw you in Sydney for the conference. I think it was last year or the year
I
before.
think it might have been the year before. Time
Well, no,
flies. Yeah.
I had you on the episode the first time. Well,
Okay.
that was last year, and so it would have been after that because we obviously knew each other then,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we had that discussion. But yeah, time does fly. And I want to give a bit of context around that discussion. We had an informal discussion over a drink last year in Sydney, and I guess, my position on a few things regarding osteopathy was that was that I was seeing that the principles and the philosophy of osteopathy wasn't really taught to university students in a way, I guess, that it was historically taught to people like you and I, and not that we saw that it wasn't taught. We were seeing the fruits of it. We saw graduates who were coming to our clinics, and I have had a couple of VU graduates that really had a thirst for it and just knew nothing about it. And I mentioned this to you, and I said, look, if it happens once, it might be an off chance. If it happens twice, it might be a coincidence. But once it strikes 3 times and 4 times and 5 times, we start to see a pattern. We need to start inquiring. Why is this happening? Why are our students graduating not understanding at the very least the principles of osteopathy? And I saw a pattern amongst both universities, and I thought that there was some kind of, I guess, push by maybe either individuals or groups of people or people who had knowledge to kind of try to move osteopathy away from its uniqueness of I guess being a system of medicine that is principle based into more of an evidence based, evidence only kind of profession that really makes it look like the other regulated professions. And the drive was that osteopaths, chiropractors, physiotherapists, and exercise physiologists would practically be doing the same thing in about 30 years' time. Now, we had this conversation, and your reply to me was that whether that is happening or not, it's not a conspiracy. It's not like all of us sit there in a room and that we say, we kind of like, do the thing and we say we're going to get rid of
stroking the cat.
Yeah, that's right. Stroking the cat, the bald cat, I guess. So you stressed that there was no intentional assault on the more, I guess, classical principled osteopathic education. Now, we've been going back and forth via email to try to set this podcast up, and I guess your response also was that, I guess there's been an ongoing critique and a skepticism of traditional principles. That would be probably a more of an accurate description. So it's not an intentional assault, but yes, there is an ongoing critique and skepticism around what you and I would recognize as osteopathic practice. And so I'd like to have this discussion with you and kind of have it in the public sphere, because you're well positioned to talk about this, seeing as you're, I guess, influential in education. And so I want to get your input. I want you to, I guess, talk to me the way that you talked to me during that conversation, and let's hear what you have to say about, I guess, the ongoing critique and criticism around traditional osteopathic practice.
Yeah, look, as I said, at the time, there isn't some sort of international conspiracy to get rid of osteopathic principles, but undoubtedly they have been emphasized, less and less than they used to be, and I think there are lots of reasons for that, and probably most of them are good reasons in my view. You mentioned evidence-based practice, and I think it's probably true that evidence-based practice, or the principles of that, are very largely the guiding light of a university course in health, irrespective of what course, because in an academic environment, you don't want to keep, or you're not, it would be incorrect to just keep repeating the same old things that have said because they're traditional, without any type of critique, or looking to see what's well supported by evidence and what isn't. And critical appraisal is a process that's considered really, foundational in universities. And not unsurprisingly, things like osteopathic traditional principles and tenets have come under scrutiny and critical appraisal time and time again. It's it's found, hard to really support them, using, scientific evidence and, good rationale. And that's not, and, you probably the most, well, we say eloquent or damning critique of them is, if you've read Ollie Thompson's articles on what's wrong
Oliver
with
Thompson, yeah.
osteopathy and Oliver Thompson's, yeah. And I think probably what I also said at the time is, in some ways, it's much easier to critique something, the status quo, than to support the status quo. In so much, it's hard to argue the case that these principles are essential and foundational, and without them we'll be lost because there's not really any evidence of what would happen if you didn't have them. But it's a much easier academic process to say, well, this tenet doesn't hold true in this case, and this case, and this case. Therefore, we can't. It's all part of critical appraisal and reflection. So that, as I see it, is sort of part of the academic process, that when osteopathy started being taught in a more of an academic or university environment, naturally we would see changes happening. And I guess you could argue that if there's not good evidence to support some tenet or assertion, then we need to consider whether we should hold that view strongly or maybe hold it at all. In my view, I think even though it's hard to, the evidence for some of these tenets is not strong, I think they have value in terms of, if nothing else, the cultural identity and a sort of a broad culture of practice that we manifest. But I would still, say that the tenets of evidence-based medicine, and by that I mean more of the original David Sackett interpretation of evidence-based medicine, and that original definition being using the best available clinical evidence, integrating it with your own clinical experience, and being mindful of patient values and expectations. So, that's held to be still the gold standard definition of evidence-based medicine. So it's not just we can only do what the evidence supports and nothing else. It's being sensible and being informed by the evidence, but still valuing your clinical experience. And your clinical experience might be informed by your principles. And it might also be the sort of principles that your patient values as well.
Most osteopaths, Gary, would consider themselves evidence informed rather than evidence based. They seem like two separate things, and you've just identified that the I guess the classical definition of evidence based medicine, the Saget definition, is that it's shaped by clinical experience as well as patient expectations, and also, the scientific evidence as well. And that needs to all be melted in together to bring about your particular viewpoint on a certain, topic. It seems like what we think is evidence-informed medicine is the classical idea of evidence-based medicine, but yet that's not what we're seeing amongst the critiques of traditional osteopathic approaches. We're seeing that they are evidence-based, and that if there's no studies that support, I guess, the clinical experience of a practitioner, then they are arguing for that to be, I guess, wrong about osteopathy. I have read Oliver Thompson's work. I would disagree with a lot of his assertions. I support his right to make them. But I don't think that what you're describing as evidence-based medicine is what the likes of Oliver Thompson are looking at as being evidence-based medicine. They don't seem to be marrying up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know Ollie, pretty well, and I think he's got a good understanding of evidence-based medicine. I think it's semantics. Evidence-based incorrectly assumes that we base, or most of what we do by evidence when really it is informing us. I far prefer the term evidence informed, but the name never stuck, and it's implied by evidence based practice or evidence based medicine, even though the name's a little bit sometimes counterintuitive. But where was I going with that? I think it's one thing. I mean, to critique principles and say these principles, don't hold true. It's another to look at the style of or the information for practice, because much of evidence-based practice is really based on clinical outcomes and randomized controlled trials and things like that. And mind you, in the last 10 or so years, there's been a big backlash to evidence-based medicine for some of the reasons you've said, the strict, some people's interpretation of a strict adherence to it, the lack of generalizability of some of these clinical trials to real-world practice, and overwhelming information no one can cope with, and all these sort of things. So it is an area that still is hotly discussed, and probably most leaders in the health sciences, I think, are having a more measured approach to what is evidence-based practice, and it's not just doing whatever the meta-analysis says you should do. It's and then you've got patient-centered care. Even if you're well informed about the best, most evidence treatment options, the patient might say, "Oh no, I don't want that. I want something else." So, patient-centered care, evidence is just one part that's informing you with that might not be acceptable or desirable for the patient. So you go with the next best option.
Well, the patient-centered care is well backed by evidence. I mean, evidence tells us the patient-centered care actually works for whatever reason. And so, if it kind of like it's quite ironic, if you're delivering something that doesn't have a strong evidence base, but yet the patient wants it, the evidence says that the patient will be better for it, which doesn't quite make sense.
Well, probably because if they want it and value it, there are all the non-specific effects of treatment, the placebo or the, contextual effects that, like, for instance, the patient that says, "Oh, look, no, don't, I don't want any of your exercise or anything. I just want you to crack my neck because I know that works for me." Well, yeah.
The proliferation, I guess, of evidence-based medicine really happened with, randomized controlled trials, meta-analysis, as you described. If the meta-analysis doesn't support what you're doing, that would come under critique. Recently, though, we've seen a shift into PROMs, patient-reported outcome measures. Raymond Perrin has had quite good success with his research using PROMs. And I guess it seems like now that at least the manual therapies are heading in that direction in terms of getting their evidence base together, using PROMs rather than, I guess, more traditional ways of putting studies together. Do you see that as something?
Could I just pretty much any study, any clinical study will use some form of validated outcome measure. So that they've all been using what we call patient-reported outcome measures for many decades. I think what we're seeing now is slow adoption by in the private practice setting of actually using these PROMs. So we've got a better understanding of whether our patients are truly improving, or in some cases using them as a screening tool, to identify things like yellow flags or fear avoidance or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Do you think that's? I mean, obviously, getting together a whole lot of data in terms of PROMs, and then with I guess the technological advancements of AI and I guess current ways of data analysis. I think there's a brighter future when it comes to a more accurate marriage of clinical experience and evidence. I think that's looking brighter in terms of the future for that. But do you have any input on that in terms of, I mean, where you'd like to see that go in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? Is that something that yeah, I think the
Do,
impression is going in the right direction?
yeah, look, research, I mean, look, is so it's always difficult. A few steps forward, a couple of steps back. It's changing, and our knowledge is increasing in a lot of different areas. I think within osteopathy, we probably haven't seen many certainly not large clinical trials. In the last 15 or 10 or 15 years. I know we've got hopes for some being planned and maybe funded, which would be great. And all of these clinical trials, as I mentioned, will use probably a variety of patient-reported outcome measures. So it's tough. Osteopathic research in Australia, we've had various individuals doing PhDs and doing great research in different areas. I suspect what many practitioners would like to see is more of the clinical trials that hopefully might either validate what they do or give them some better guidance as to what's the most effective form of treatment for different conditions. But it's always been really difficult to get the sort of grants that we need for any well-powered randomized controlled trial. And within osteopathy, we don't have many researchers with a track record of getting such grants, and certainly not me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, um, it's a difficult one because money is something that it's hard to come by if you're not in the drug business, or if you're not in the prosthetic business, I guess. Because I guess disease can be an industry sometimes, and hopefully we're in the business of health, and that can be hard to monetize. Um, I want to guess ask you then, or not ask you, but I want to discuss with you. Um, uh, uh, One of the reasons why I wanted to discuss your clinical experience initially, and um, pump up your tires, so to speak, was that you've published, you're a researcher, you're an academic, but you've got some grounding in clinical experience, really good grounding. I've spoken to Lainey Cameron recently on the podcast. That episode will air probably right before yours airs in a few weeks. And she's in a similar position. She's just been appointed as the head of osteopathy over at Southern Cross University, and she's got many, many years under her belt of clinical experience and clinical practice. She's a researcher. She's an academic, and that's really admirable. I think that's the kind of um, research. That's the kind of person we need doing the research. And I guess going back to what you were talking about, the tenets of osteopathy and some of the critiques from people like Oliver Thompson, I think that's a low blow. I think what Oliver did there in his critique, because it's really hard to have evidence for a philosophy, a philosophy or an idea, but to really play that out and to have some kind of evidence for it, it's quite difficult. We can discuss ideas, we can have a framework for how things work, but yet how people apply those ideas can be quite different in the clinical setting. It doesn't mean that those ideas are wrong or they should be thrown out. It just means that we need to keep discussing them. They seem
Would,
to have.
wouldn't
Yep.
could I just wouldn't you
Yep.
say what Oliver's articles provoked a whole lot of discussion, like
Well,
that?
they're bound to provoke. They're bound to provoke, Gary, because they were quite provocative. The title itself was "What's Wrong with Osteopathy," um, And so, I mean, I would like if he'd write what's right with osteopathy, what's good about osteopathy. He's obviously, I mean, he's an osteopath. He's calls himself an osteopath. I mean, so he's an osteopath. One of the things that I've learned from talking to people on this podcast and just in my career is that, and this is going to sound quite harsh, but this is what I'm here to talk about and to discuss with you. It seems that the people who are writing these papers, I'm not sure how clinically impressive they are. I know how clinically impressive you are. I understand you've been there for many, many years. But I don't know how have they not gotten results doing what they do? Is this why that,
Look, I got to say, I disagree. I think that's a bit of a straw man argument, or to say,
well,
oh well,
he's straw man osteopathy though.
they can't be in clinical practice because they don't agree with what I agree with.
No. I didn't say they can't be a clinical practice. I don't know his clinical history. I don't know how long he's practiced for. I don't know how many people he's seen. I don't know if he actually practices osteopathy. Like, what does he do in clinical practice? Has he applied osteopathy and then found that it doesn't work? Or I'm not really sure what he's done. I just know that from my experience with seeing practitioners who seem to be quite hell-bent on using evidence as their mark for whether something makes the cut of osteopathy, is they don't seem to be clinically impressive. That's just an observation I've made. I could be wrong. And so, just reading that stuff, I mean, you know him, so you might have a better understanding.
Hello everyone, just a quick break to give you some information on where to best find me. The first place is the private Facebook group called the Successful Practitioner Pathway. I've set up this private group as a place where practitioners can go and get tips and advice on how to best accelerate their practice and improve their clinical practice skills. The second place to find me is at successinpractice.net. That is where the Success in Practice signature program is housed. You can find more information about me and how I can best help you achieve success in your practice. So, the two best places, the private Facebook group, the Successful Practitioner Pathway, and successinpractice.net. I will link to both those places in the show notes, so for more information, please see the show notes. Now, enjoy and back to the show.
I'm still of that opinion. I haven't seen anyone yet that could tell me that they've only practiced for 5 to 10 years and now they've began publishing papers on osteopathy. That doesn't seem quite impressive to me. Like, that's not.
I still, I think you may be being unfair. I mean, I don't know all of Oliver's clinical background. I think he's probably been practicing for about 20 years, but I may be wrong. But I've known him for probably nearly that, I think, or 15. It seems to me you're saying if somebody's critical of osteopathy, then they must not have properly practiced. And I think that's not a valid argument.
No, you could be critical of osteopathy. I've been critical of osteopathy. I've been critical of some approaches to osteopathy. I've been critical of a lot of for example, the exercise approaches of osteopaths. But being critical of osteopaths is different than being critical of osteopathy. What exactly are you critiquing? Are you critiquing what osteopaths do or how osteopaths think? Because critiquing a technique that osteopaths perform is one thing, and you could do that. You could definitely do that. There's no problem with that. But from what I understand from the paper and reading the paper, I mean, he's critiqued that osteopaths actually don't have a grounding in anatomy. He's critiqued that osteopaths don't. It's like, well, if everything's connected, then nothing's connected. And so they're some of the things that some of the ideas that he's put together. And I guess my reply to that is that I think osteopathy also has, and osteopaths also, there's an element of talent to an osteopath. Like, there are good osteopaths that are going to get results, and then there are osteopaths that may not get results. We see it amongst all professions. I mean, we can't deny that there are talented, professionals amongst all professions.
So can I ask you what in your view, makes the difference? Is it
I think
a belief in principles, or is it
I think results are king. I think for any practice, results are king.
Yeah, sure, but so why do some get results? I think you were saying, and others don't.
Mm.
What's the difference? What
Well, it's how
what's the winning factor?
it's how you apply it. It's how you apply it. And I don't have evidence for that because I can't tell you because every patient's different. But I apply a set of principles to that patient. I have my way of applying the principles, and then I get a certain result. I'm not successful every time, but I'm successful a lot of times. And if I were to bring on many other osteopaths here, they would say that they're successful a lot of times. And I know there are many osteopaths there are a few that I studied with, and there are many osteopaths now that are leading the profession. Now, some of that may be due to the fact that they're just not good at what they do. The talent plays a part in this, Gary. I mean, you know that. You develop a skill set. It takes time. You put your hands on people. You can feel things at, say, 5 years into practice that you wouldn't have felt a year into practice. And so that's a talent acquisition.
I partly agree with you. I mean, I think I do believe that hands-on skill and certainly plays a role in effectiveness. But I think there's so many other things that play a role too. Patient management, your attitude, these contextual factors, the confidence
Definitely.
you apply it, and so I think it's. I think I hear you making an argument that the ones that don't do well haven't really embraced osteopathic principles, and that's why they don't do well. Where I don't think we can say that. I think there are so many maybe other factors, around personality and communication, which might have a stronger bearing on who's successful and who isn't.
I agree with you on that, and I think that's part of the talent too. It's not just I guess the principles; it's the delivery of those principles as well. So I agree with you, and I guess my critique is that if you want to criticize a technique or an approach, you want to criticize HVLA, you want to criticize counter strain, you want to criticize cranial, go for it. No problem at all there, like no problem whatsoever. But once you start to critique a set of ideas, you can't use a lack of evidence as a critique of an idea. I mean, we could debate the idea and we could have a logical discussion about the idea, and you could prove me wrong. You could sit there and say, well, if this happens, then, let's look at the structure and function. Is structure and function interrelated? Let's talk about that idea, for example. And so I could say, well, no, it's not interrelated. It has no bearing at all. Structure has no bearing on function. And so we could sit there and actually have a mechanical discussion about that. And we could, and then we can have an audience, and the audience could decide for themselves what goes on. Who's won the debate, or it's not even about winning or losing. It's just about learning, right? So we could do that, but I don't think that's what Oliver was doing in that paper that he wrote, and in subsequent papers that he's written. I think what he did was strawman osteopathy, and take the fact that there's no evidence to support the claims of osteopaths. Therefore, we need to rethink those claims, and we need to, better understand what osteopaths actually believe in. And so that's my, I guess, problem with what he's written.
Can I suggest you invite him on your podcast?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I'm happy to. I don't know how well the conversation will go, but definitely happy to have him on.
He's run his own podcast. He'd be happy to speak, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the issue, and I guess what I found talking to, I guess, academics. Of both. I've talked to academics with many years of clinical experience, and I've talked to academics with few years of clinical experience. It just seems to me the ones with fewer years of clinical experience aren't that clinically impressive, and so that's the.
I'm not sure what you mean by not clinically impressive. Have you had a treatment from them, or how do you assess that? Because I think you're being maybe dismissive because you think they shouldn't be teaching because they haven't had a lot of experience, and that doesn't mean they're clinically unimpressive. Do you know what I mean?
So
It's
that's another argument. Whether they should be teaching or not is I guess another topic of discussion. What I mean by
and
that is that yeah, go ahead.
and can I say even our clinical clinicians, all have at least 5 years, practice experience, and our teaching staff, almost always a great deal more than that. But
Yeah, no,
um, you
I
know,
yeah, that's not I don't that's not what I was getting at.
mm,
So when I say that they don't seem to be clinically impressive, is that when you have a discussion with a practitioner, you from a lot of their answers, you get an idea of their thought process. And I guess for me, what connects osteopaths, when I talk to osteopaths, I can get an idea of their thought process and how they think about osteopathy. And ultimately, that takes them really 60 or 70% of the way there. The other 30% seems to be technique based. Can they apply what their rationale is in their head? Can they take that rationale and turn it into something they can use with their hands and apply a treatment? Or doesn't it have to be with their hands? Can they use that to apply an exercise routine or some kind of advice to their lifestyle or their nutrition or whatever? And so I get a sense from their answers about their rationale about osteopathy. And for me, you could have all the knowledge in the world, but if that rationale seems to be missing, it tends to translate into not being clinically impressive. So that's what I mean by that. And that's as best as I can describe it. Um, and so, yeah, I guess we can disagree about that, but you seem to be clinically impressive, Gary.
well, that's you've been impressed by my CV, maybe. Yeah.
No, it's not. No, no, mate. It's no. It's not the CV.
Mm.
And I learned that from, I guess, the first conversation we had, and it was reinforced when we had that discussion in Sydney. But I guess, look, I would have a problem, for example, if somebody was in your position with very, very limited clinical experience. That would be, I would critique that. That would be something that I would, if somebody were to, have 5 years of clinical experience or 3 or 4 years of clinical experience, barely 30 hours a week or barely 20 hours a week, and then they came into the role of being head of a program, that would be something that I would find would cause problems for the program eventually. I think that would, yeah.
Mm.
But anyway,
I, yeah.
that could be a topic for another time.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe. I mean, I agree. Some clinical experience is really valuable in a role like this, but it's not the be all or end all. You can have,
uh, yeah,
practitioners with heaps of clinical experience, but not well be suited, and probably vice versa.
yeah. There is a technical aspect, I guess, to doing what you're doing, Gary, and that takes time to develop, just like clinical experience does too. So, I'm not heaping praise on you, mate, because you're undeserving. Like you've been through the fire of clinical practice and you've been involved in teaching since 1997. Nobody can say that you haven't paid your dues in both of those areas, which I don't know if any rational person could sit there and go, that's not a very good combination. That would be hard to argue against. So that's where I'm coming from. I mean, if you, like I said, if you were somebody who had very limited clinical experience and you take it up the head of a program, you would be an anomaly if you were doing a fantastic job and we were just seeing really good students coming out. But it could happen. But I'm just saying that would be an anomaly. All right, I want to, unless you have something more to add, I'm happy to move on to the next topic of discussion. Is there anything you want to add to that? I want to give you the last word on that, seeing as it's a bit contentious.
No. Let's move on.
All right. We also, I guess, a little while after that, we also had an interaction on the topic of diversity within osteopathy. That happened in the context, and I'll give some, yeah. The context around that was around the election time of the Osteopathy Australia elections. I kind of I was a little bit upset with the call for elections, specifically, I guess, discouraging business owners from wanting to participate in those board elections. I made my opinion quite clear, and as subsequent to that and some discussions that were had, my ability to interact in that forum has been restricted. You were kind enough to, I guess, send me an email and I guess state a little position that you had on diversity. You sent a link to a video. Watched that video, and I guess I was able to take on some of the points that you made. Whilst I still have my opinion on diversity within osteopathy, I guess I want to have the discussion with you. Being that you're very team focused at VU, and you're very, I guess, inclusive in how you make decisions. Tell us about how diversity affects your particular institution there, and how you use it to your advantage.
I guess the point I was making, previously with the board, is that when you've got a team, it is good to have diversity, within that team, and and in that if somebody's diversity of, say, backgrounds. Means that people are likely to have different perspectives. And so, that's going to be really useful from the point of view of problem solving. The example would be if everybody, let's say in my team, were an inner urban male osteopath, we might have a very, we might share the same, opinions on most things, and be blind to some possibilities. If we had a much more mixed team, and which we do, and that's a way that I think diversity is useful in teams. I wasn't meaning, and I hope that we should have quotas or checklists, and because even sort of things that, and it's a very political topic, but with things like race and gender quotas and so on. I mean, it's more about diversity of opinions. And if if everybody, you recruited everybody and you managed to check the quotas for all the different groups and so on, but still, if everybody there came from the, was left leaning inner suburbs, you probably wouldn't have a very diverse perspective. So by and I mean this in context to the discussion, I think, with the OA board. There was a call, particularly hoping to get rural members, coming on the board. And I think, I saw the logic in that, because,
I don't think that was,
they might have, a different perspective, than if the board was comprising primarily, urban, osteopaths.
Yeah, I don't think the rural aspect was the highlighted part was that that there was many business owners already on the board, and that they would prefer not to have business owners apply for that position. Me, obviously being a business owner, but also I knew of a couple of candidates who were business owners that were thinking of running, and I know that the person that actually ended up getting elected was Heath Williams, who's a business owner who originally is from rural Victoria, who actually checked every box that they wanted.
He's great in that role, yeah.
Right, he's great in that role, and he was. I spoke to him privately, and he was actually quite discouraged by that call, and so you may have had somebody who may not have possibly run for the election, who ended up getting nominated and won. And so we have to be careful as well. And look, going back to what you said, and I'm going to ask you this question, what you're after, Gary, is you're after diversity of opinion, not so much diversity of genetics or diversity of, race or culture or gender. And diversity of opinion is something that is valuable in an organization. So I don't, I don't disagree with you on that. The problem we have in osteopathy is that, look, we've got a profession of, say, 4,000, just over 4,000 osteopaths in Australia. The membership of Osteopathy Australia sits around the 2,000 mark. It's 50% of the profession, roughly. Um, within that, within that 50% of 2,000, voting usually happens by about 300. You get about 300 votes in an election, and you get maybe 6 or 7 people nominate. Like, you're really reducing the pool down, quite a bit. And to then go and ask for certain characteristics, you're really, like, as much as we want to try to, I guess, get a diversity of opinion, we also want to try to broaden the horizon of the people that we catch so we can have that diversity. And if you start saying we don't want business owners, or we discourage business owners, or we discourage people from, from Melbourne, for example, or we discourage people. I mean, the same argument can be made for now. We don't currently have any board members from New South Wales. And New South Wales being the largest market in the country, that seems to be unfair that we haven't had anyone elected from New South Wales,
You'll have to get Matt Cooper back on the show.
Matt's invited to come on the show anytime he wants. He's got an open forum here, so he's more than welcome to come back. And so, yeah, we currently don't have that. Now, one could make the argument that there should be at least a state representative from each state in the country. You could argue that point a little bit more, that you could say we would discourage a business owner. But even then, we want to really open up that election process to the broadest range of people that want to. So I don't see a point in saying, oh, we prefer this or we prefer that, or we don't prefer this or don't prefer that, in such a small population already. If you're the APA, if you're the Australian Physiotherapy Association, and you've got 30,000 members, by all means, look, we need an opinion from somebody who's from rural wherever, you could do that, and you'll still catch, 10 or 15 applicants. But, when you're osteopathy and you need to have, I guess, the best and brightest, if you can get them, why would you shrink down the pool of people that you could have on the board? So that's my view on our particular context. So if you have a view that is against that, or you want to push back on that, I'm happy to have that discussion with you.
Oh, I'm a OA member, but I'm not on the board. I don't run the elections. But at the time I saw the logic, and I still do, of trying to, if you don't have, I assumed, there weren't many board members who were more remote, and they were trying to, include that. But yeah.
Look, for example, there's a board member on there who is of early career, right? And that's not a board member who's voted on. That's one who's appointed. And so there's an early career board member who's appointed. That's not even a voted position. And so you could argue for also a 30 plus year position as well, because we seem to be lacking members who have 30 plus, 40 plus years experience. And so it would be good to have somebody, so, like, where do we stop? Where do we draw the line of positions that we need to appoint so that everybody gets a say? One of the ideas that I had that I would put to the board is to actually open up the board positions to members and non-members as well. And if you're successful at the election, then you would have to become a member to be part of the board. And so, let's say you weren't an OA member, Gary, but you felt like the place needed a change because you weren't happy, because a lot of members leave the membership. A lot of non-members have left because they're unhappy with the direction of the association. That's fair enough. And so that would be a way to bring people back into the fold, is to open up the board to non-members as well as members. And based on your election, you would then have to join the membership to sit on the board.
I see problems with that, but maybe that's something you could take up with the OA.
Yeah. Problems are sometimes good because they lead you to solutions. So we'll see how we go with that. That's just an idea. So yeah, look, that was an interesting discussion that we had at the time. I appreciated your input on that privately to me, and so thank you for that. So, Gary, I asked you this off air, but what does the future look like for you, mate, in the next 5 years? Are you planning on staying over at VU? Are you planning on any kind of clinical work? Is that you going back to that? COVID's over now, so what's in store for you in the next 5 years?
Um, no major changes. My plans are maybe to progressively improve my life work balance, and maybe slowly reduce my fraction percentage at VU. I don't think I'm going to get back into clinical work, but never say never. I've got a sort of a weird inflammatory arthritis that's sort of affecting a few fingers, and it's sort of not making me feel good about returning to practice. So things, as I mentioned earlier, look, I think going really well at VU. I think we've got a really good team. I'm really grateful that my colleague Nick Tripodi is sharing the course chair role with me, which has made my life much easier. Because it over the COVID era, and for about 4 years, it was pretty tough going. It just felt really, there's so many changes going on and so many issues. That wasn't a really happy time, but it's feeling pretty good about it. So probably more of the same, but progressively stepping back a little.
Okay. And going back to also what we were talking about earlier about critiquing osteopathy, what kind of discussions would you like to see happen around osteopathy? Like, I'm doing this and having the podcast it's great to talk to people like you, and I've talked to many other people. It's been really just a wonderful experience for me. And I think, broadly speaking, I think it would be a great thing just for more discussion to happen within our profession around whatever topics I think people want to talk about, but specifically around osteopathy and who we are and what we do. But for you, Gary, where would you like to see discussions that maybe aren't being had?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, and I have to think about that. I'd love to have maybe, you could sort of have like a short snippets of practitioners, explaining what they find most useful, or clinical pearls, or something inspiring that maybe students could look at, doesn't need to be a TikTok form, but I know that'd go well for the students. But that would give them a sense of how broad a church osteopathy is, the variety of approaches, but also the enthusiasm, the practitioners have. Because, as you've undoubtedly noted, some of our graduates, maybe most, haven't been adequately inspired, and we're scratching our heads and, going back and working out how we can do a better job of that. But, it's something like that, I think would be really good.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think it's a good place to wrap it up on a positive note. Gary, I want to thank you for joining me today. If people want to reach Gary, I'll link Gary's email in the show notes. Gary, stay on the line with me, but for everyone else, have a good evening, and I'll catch you on the next episode.